And as always, a very warm welcome to this week's Life Issues. Now, there's an old saw that goes, Jesus' greatest miracle wasn't that he turned water into wine. It wasn't that he stilled the storm. It wasn't that he fed the 5,000 with some fish sandwiches. It was that as a man in his 30s, he had a group of friends. All right, it's a joke, and maybe the stereotype about men having no friends doesn't hold water quite so much anymore, but it does make a point, doesn't it? Friends are important. Friendships take work, and perhaps friendships are part of God's plan that we might fulfill our potential. So this week on Life Issues, we're talking about friendship. Thomas Aquinas said, "There is nothing on this earth more to be prized than true friendship." John Lennon said, "Count your age by friends, not years." I know you were expecting I'll get by with little help, weren't you? The truth is, we could be here all day exploring the lessons from Woody singing "You've Got a Friend in Me" at the beginning of Toy Story. But what is real friendship? How do we make friends? Why do we need friends? How can I be a good friend? Well, Kate Wharton is the vicar of St Bartholomew's Church in Roby in Liverpool. And she's also a member of the General Synod and author of Single-Minded, Being Single and Whole and Living Life to the Full. I first spoke to Kate in 2018 when she mirrored a wedding service by taking vows to remain single after she felt God had given her a choice and she was responding to a calling. I'll be honest with you, I still wish that I had been there a couple of years before that for her seminars at New Wine when she talked about living a God-obsessed life in a sex-obsessed world and living a God-obsessed life in a marriage-obsessed church. I actually think it was the second one that ruffled more feathers. She's one of my guests today to talk about friendship. So, how important are friends on your journey, Kate?
Well, what an intro and what a question. Friends are hugely important on my journey, on lots of our journeys, I think. And I don't think that's only because I'm an off-the-scale extrovert, although that might have something to do with it. Friends are massively important. My friends keep me going through the ups and downs of life, definitely kept me going through the pandemic. And hugely supported me on the journey that you just described there. My journey of singleness and getting to the point of making that vow. I wouldn't say I wanted it to mirror the wedding service, but to making that vow, yeah, definitely.
And I suppose there is that element for you that having made that commitment for singleness and reached the point where you felt that was the right thing to do, you talk a fair bit about the importance of having a good circle of friends around you that give you the connection, the intimacy, the encouragement, the support, the accountability that often one would find in a married couple. If you are single, it's important you've got friends that give you that wholeness around your life. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think friends are important for all of us, whatever our kind of situation in life. But I suppose for me, obviously, I can only speak as a single person. That's always been my experience. And yeah, I think that's right. And particularly for me as well, I've got a very small family. I'm an only child and I'm single. So my friends are my family in many ways. And I think that is really important. And I'm a big fan of all sorts of friendships. So I'm a 46-year-old woman, but I don't think the only sort of people it's appropriate for me to be friends with are other 46-year-old women. I think friendship spans all kinds of different categories as well. And I think different kinds of friendships give us different things and bring different things into our lives. We have lifelong friendships. We have friendships for a season. We have friendships that connect to a particular interest or, that kind of thing. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, friendship is hugely important. And I've thought about it a lot. I mean, as you say, I've spoken on singleness, but also just kind of reflecting on how we make friends as an adult and the different role that friends play in our lives and the way in which they encourage us and challenge us and support us and all of that.
And if I might harken back to those early seminars you delivered at New Wine, in a couples obsessed world, how do you navigate assumptions and mixed messages, and maybe assumptions within the circle of friends, but also maybe assumptions from people outside looking in on that circle as a single person? How do you work within the perpetual expectation that, oh, this must be a journey to coupleship that this friendship or this group of friends is supporting?
It's a great question. I mean, it's the subject of a lot more time than we've got to give it now. But I think there's a couple of things. So I think there's the two single people for being friends who people assume is heading towards a relationship. But then there's also a married couple and one or both of them being friends with a single person. And there's all of that stuff to navigate. I think it's really worth navigating because I think it's really important. I think friendships between men and women, friendships between single people and married people are really important, have a lot to offer. I think, of course, we've got to have safeguards in place. We've got to be a bit sensible about how we do that. But I don't hold to the kind of, a married man can never be friends with a single woman. I don't think that's right. I think that lessens everybody's opportunities for friendship. But I suppose I do have a few rules around that, if you like. So if I'm, in my job, I'm ordained. I work within the Church of England. I have a particular role in the national church. I meet people in different categories. Inevitably, I suppose I meet some men who are married because they're also vicars. I think I can develop a friendship with them, but I would always be really careful about that in terms of wanting also to get to know their wife or, that kind of thing and how we communicate with each other. So there's definitely safeguards that I would want to put in place and some clarity that I would want there to be about the friendship. But I really believe that kind of friendship is not just possible, but is also really beneficial and helpful and important.
Well, that idea of circle of friends is part, or circles of friends rather, is part of Phil Knox's book, who's my other guest to talk about this today. Phil is an evangelist, a speaker. He's also a missiologist, easy for him to say, at the Evangelical Alliance. He's passionate about making Jesus known and seeing communities thrive. So perhaps that idea of communities thriving make it no great surprise that he too has turned his attention to friendship. The Best of Friends is his second book. It's published by IVP. And, well, that same question to you, Phil. I mean, how important have friends been on your journey?
Thanks, Paul, and great to be part of this really important conversation. My passion for friendship came out of a real place of pain, actually. I, like many people, had a really terrible pandemic. So you mentioned I'm an author. My first book came out in March 2020, which, as many listeners will recall, was the week all the bookshops closed. I was incredibly discouraged and disappointed. But then far more tragically found out that my mum, who'd been battling with cancer for about 6 months, we found out that cancer was terminal. So I spent the first kind of few weeks of those lockdown months sat at the end of her driveway. It was a really painful time, and she eventually went to be with Jesus on the 8th of June, 2020. And in terms of the kind of the worst months of my life that was just about the lowest, really. And two things got me through that dark valley: faith in Jesus and friendship. But yet what struck me and was so stark was this was at a time when I really needed people. I really needed hugs and people to stand with me and walk with me. But it was at a time of social distancing when we weren't allowed to be with people in the same way as in normal times. And so I just began to reflect and felt the Lord bring to my mind this great gift of friendship. And I profoundly remember one morning, one thing that got me through that season was just prayer walking every morning around the community and really pouring my heart out to God. And I really remember the spot where I was in, where I felt the Lord say, we need to talk about friendship more, both as a society and as a church. And since then, since the book came out, I've just had the joy of talking about friendship in lots of different places and trying to raise the volume of this really important conversation.
And as I say, you do, and we'll talk about other elements of friendship as we go through this time, but you do talk in the book about circles of friendship. And I suppose in some ways, your experience from Kate's is very similar, but also very different, because as a married man with a family, you have hopefully your best friend in your spouse, but the importance of those sorts of circles and recognition that there are different types of friendship, but that are equally strong, equally beneficial, serve a different purpose, but equally important purpose. That's something that needs to be clarified, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think what's happened for us as a world over the last kind of few decades is that we've got more and more connections, but fewer close friends. And I think social media has kind of lent into this a little. Facebook gives us the kind of illusion of friendship, doesn't it? And I think what's happened is that kind of the scientists and anthropologists have looked at this and said, is it possible for people to have 2,000 friends? Because social media gives us this language of friendship. And what the kind of the latest research and science tells us is that we can't possibly, our brains aren't big enough to have 2,000 friends. We have finite, limited relational capacity. So the latest science says that our limit for what we can have in terms of good friendships is about 150. Now, if you're listening to this and don't have 150 friends, don't worry, that's your kind of upper capacity. But then what the latest research has then looked at and said is how many good friends can we have and how many great friends can we have? And it turns out that the best science around us of 2025 tells us we can have about 12 good friends and 3 great friends. And as I kind of was reading this, I thought that sounds really familiar.
Yeah, somewhere across that.
Highest heaven to lowest earth and formed groups around him. He did so exactly like that. And so I think we all need an honest conversation about how many of the people in our lives are acquaintances, how many are really good friends, and how many are just friends. And a really honest moment where we say it's okay, right, to have lots of connections, but we also desperately need kind of really good friends at the center of those circles.
And I suppose part of the danger is that when we think we've got, thousands of friends, and I haven't got thousands of people friends with me on social media, but when we've got that sort of way of thinking, that we just assume that that's where the level of friendship is, rather than investing in the closer, the 12, the 3, those closer connections, investing in the real depth, the strength, the foundation of those friendships.
Yeah, and I think it all comes down to intentionality. I think it's a really key word in lots of areas of life, and is really true for friendship as well. And I think, so for example, I'm in my inner circle, I've got my wife, my brother, my sister, and my best friend. And I make sure I have at least weekly contact with all of those. Now, my wife apparently expects more than weekly contact. But especially with my best friend, I'm really intentional and making sure we have a really good conversation at least once a week, because I think one of the reasons we haven't been talking about friendship is we've just neglected it, and we've neglected it in favor of things like romance. We've neglected it in things like the busyness of life and work. And I think one of the hopeful rediscoveries that I think we're making as a world at the moment is that friendship really matters, and we need to be really intentional about it.
You're listening to UCB Life Issues. We're speaking to Kate Warden and Phil Knox. We are talking about friendship this week. Now, the truth is, my grandson, one of my grandsons, who is just 9, he could make a friend in an empty room. And I know, Kate, it's a point that you've made, that children seem to find it a lot easier to make friends than adults do. Why do we find it so hard?
Yeah, it's really true, isn't it? You don't have to spend much time among children. You just have to take a small child to a playground, and they've got like 5 best friends by the time you leave, and it's lovely. And of course, Jesus tells us we should be like little children, and I think there's all sorts of ways in which that's true. But I like stability, and how often children laugh in a day is definitely one of the ways we should be more like little children. But I think one of them is this thing around friendship. We find it harder as adults. We get more cynical. We get more busy. We overthink things more. Or is that just me? What if I'm underthinking? But yeah, I think we've lost the ability. And I definitely talk to people in my job, or just in life, who Phil's thing about 3 friends, 12 friends, 150 friends, who would say, I don't think I have any. I don't have anyone who I could call. Because, if we think who would be the person when it all just comes crumbling down in that moment, how many people are there then that I could call? And for some of us, we say we don't have those people. Or for some of us, we're aware we want to make a friend. We might, there might be someone at church, or there might be someone in a down our street, or at work, and we think, I think I get that person. I think I like that person. I don't know what to do next. And I think we've slightly lost that ability, haven't we? There's something about friendship that's just about saying, we've got something a little bit in common here. I mean, it's obviously different from the trying to develop a romantic relationship, but there are some similarities, aren't there, in terms of saying there's a little spark of something here. Like, I get you. We think the same way, or there's something there. And it's just how we develop and work that out, isn't it?
Do you think there's an element of expectation in all of this as well? Because, as you say, I take my grandson to the playground, and, when he leaves, he's got 5 best mates. They are his best mates ever. I mean, except they're not from my adult perspective, because that relationship, we walk away, it's unlikely he'll ever see them again. But actually, that doesn't feature in limiting his expectation of in-the-moment friendship. And I wonder if our expectation of friendship actually limits our ability to explore friendship, Kate.
Yes, I think that may well be true. I think because we're all aware that we're busy and we've got limited capacity, limited energy, limited time, perhaps we kind of have built it up a little bit too much. And we think that friendship has to mean I'm going to have a connection with this person for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I'm going to need to make sure I have a meaningful conversation with this person every week. Whereas, as Phil's just said, that's the connection you might want with your best friend, but actually maybe there's a gap in your life for the sort of friend that once every 2 or 3 months you get a coffee together, and that's still really valuable and meaningful. But it doesn't have to mean that you tell each other everything and make a covenant to just to connect for the next 50 years. There are different types of friendship, seasons of friendship, levels of friendship, all of that. So yeah, perhaps we almost place too big a deal on it. And perhaps also, I think some people are just a bit anxious about putting themselves out there. Somebody's got to say, haven't they? Do you fancy getting a coffee? Do you want to go for a walk? Somebody's got to just take the initiative and do that.
Yeah. What do you think, Phil? Because loneliness is, the current pandemic, isn't it? There are so many issues around people feeling isolated and feeling alone. Why do you think it is that we have become so disconnected and lonely? Why do we find it so hard to make those meaningful connections?
Yeah, I think it's a real challenge, first of all. So just to pile on the bad news. Now, I like to brand myself as a good news person in a bad news world. And we evangelicals, like to be good news people. But let me give you some bad news first. So 1 in 3 men say they have no close friends. It's not much better for women. 40% of 16 to 24-year-olds say they always or often feel lonely. The World Health Organization at the end of 2023 said that we're facing a global loneliness epidemic, and launched a task group to look at that across the world. So it is a problem, first of all. And the thing I want to say to those listening today is, if you feel lonely, you are not alone. This is a common problem, but there is something we can all do about it, and we all have a part to play in being really good friends. I think the other factors are things like busyness. When you look at the research as to why people struggle with friendship, busyness is, time is like oxygen to friendship, and we are starved of time. Mobility is a big factor. So the fact that we're all moving around so often, when we stay in one place for a long time, we don't just develop geographical roots, but we develop kind of relational roots. And the challenges as a world, we move so often for work and school and other things. Shyness is a problem. And when we look at some of the reasons why people don't make friends, But also there's things like the way in which we work has changed. And so we're not necessarily working more hours than previous generations, but most of us, like I'm guessing Paul and Kate, you guys are, we're what's called knowledge workers, which means that we primarily use our brains to work, unlike previous generations who primarily use their bodies. And what that means is that we're using the same muscles at work that we use to invest in our relationships. And this is a real contrast for me because my best mate is a builder. So he primarily uses his body. Now he says to his clients, he thinks as well, which I think is reassuring. But when he gets home from work, he is like ready for friendship. But I've been like thinking, I've been writing, I've been speaking. I'm relationally exhausted. And I think many of us, as I've been speaking about this over the last few years, many people say, I just get to the end of the day and I have no capacity for anything more than just to slob in front of the TV, because I think the nature of work has changed. I think we just need to recognize that friendship's so important, but we are swimming against the tide, which is why we need to prioritize it.
So how do we be intentional friends then? Because if friendship doesn't just happen, or perhaps in the book you suggest that we should actively shy away from just letting friendship happen, and we should actually be intentional friends. How do I move to that place, especially if so many people are so lonely, so isolated? I mean, it could well be that I am the opportunity that somebody else needs to find a friend that gives them the opportunity to find not just God's potential for their life, but their potential for a richer and fuller life.
Absolutely. When you give the gift of friendship to somebody else, you are giving them life and love and hope. Jesus said, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. But how do we do that? I think, first of all, we recognize it's not easy. So there are no quick fixes when it comes to this, but there are a few key values I think I'd offer today. The first is to be really realistic. And so the circles model I've found is really helpful. We don't have to be great friends with everybody. We cannot be great friends with everybody, but we can be great friends with a few people. And we can therefore be intentional with the amount of time we spend with them and be intentional about a few key things. So a friend of mine talks about kind of check-ins, catch-ups and meetups. So just now and again, when the amount of time I spend scrolling on my phone is frankly embarrassing. But for the amount of time I scroll, I want to also just message a few people and say, how you doing? Just checking in with you today. Anything I can pray for you today? That doesn't cost me very much emotional energy. I think that's really one important way in which we can grow our friendships. I think another way is the kind of when we think about catch-ups. Apparently, the little devices we use to text people also can be used for phone calls. And I don't know about you guys, but I find now, I often feel like I've got to text people to say, are you free for a call? Rather than just giving them a call. And so just phoning people now and again, I'm just calling to catch up. If you've got 10 minutes I just want to see how you're doing. No agenda, just want to catch up. Again, not too expensive in terms of our time and energy. But then also meetups now and again, as Kate said, just the chance to kind of say to people, do you want to go for a coffee? Do you want to go for a walk? Those moments can be really helpful. But also find things that people love to do. So my best mate, if he said to me, do you want to go for a coffee? I'd be really concerned, because in like 25 years of friendship, he's never said, we're not, do you know what I mean? That's not his kind of love language, if you like. His love language is hanging out and doing exercise. So this afternoon, we're going to go and hang out and do some exercise together. And we have really deep conversations and we'll talk about life. But it's side by side, not necessarily face to face.
Yeah, yeah.
And the final thing I'd add on the kind of depth of friendship thing is we need to have a really good conversation and we need to be vulnerable with one another. So I think we need to ask better questions of one another. Small talk is really good, but we need to go deeper with those closer to us. And the way we grow our friendships is not just asking about our sports teams or what happened at the weekend. It's about talking about how we're feeling about stuff. I think it's Rob Parsons who says, if you want acquaintances, tell them your successes. But if you want friends, tell them your failures, your fears, your hopes and your dreams. There's something about that. And I'm sure you guys have observed, and many people listening will observe, when you grow a deeper friendship, it's often one of you opens your heart first and says, can I tell you what I'm really struggling with? Can I tell you this thing that's just gone wrong? And then what often happens is the other person then says, thank you for sharing that. Can I tell you about what I'm really struggling with? And there's this kind of virtuous spiral that kind of goes deeper into a higher quality of relationship. And all those things I found helpful in growing my own friendship. But if you're struggling with this, don't panic. There's so many people struggling with this. But there are things we can do.
It's not always easy, though, is it, Kate? Because I think especially if you're in a situation like as you are, the leadership vicar of a church, then if you prioritize friendships with people who are your inner circle, sometimes that can lead to a bit of jealousy and so on within the wider community, can't it? I mean, adult friendships are really important, but we still have to be sensitive around them.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I really enjoyed, by the way, the sort of different type. So I really enjoy that Phil's going to go out to exercise later on with his best friend. I'm the opposite way around. If my best friend texted me and asked me to go and exercise with her, I would believe she'd been kidnapped and was making a cry for help. Brilliant. I love it. I think there's something. So I really love at the moment, you know how sometimes you sit with a particular Bible story or passage and it really just percolates the whole of your life. I am loving at the moment Hagar. And I particularly love that bit of the story where she says, I have been seen by the God who sees me.
Yes.
And I, for me, that says something really important to me about friendship. That friendship is when two people really see each other. It's become a bit of a watchword in our culture and society, hasn't it? I feel seen. But actually, I think it's really important. You can have a chat with someone can know you. Do they see you? Do they get you? And I think there's something there about getting each other. And as Phil says, that moment where one of you dares to say the extra honest thing. And sometimes it doesn't work, does it? Sometimes the other person goes, oh, I wasn't ready for that level of honesty. Oh, heck, it hasn't quite worked. But that's okay, because sometimes it does work and then it really strengthens the connection. I think you're right. I mean, I think for me in this role, there are definitely different types of friendship. I think the kinds of friendship that sustain and are deep and are lasting are the kind of equal ones where you are both daring the same amount of depth. And you both have the same kind of expectation and you're both willing to commit the same amount of effort and time. Those are the friendships that endure. And that amount of effort might be a once a year lunch, or it might be a once a week phone call, but you both have got the same expectation. I think where it can become tricky is where there's unequal expectations. And so I think there needs to be some clarity in that. And that might happen just organically, or it might be that you need to have a conversation that says, here's what I think, almost what we're committing to. You don't quite write a contract, but you almost have a conversation about what you both think you're getting into.
And you mentioned earlier on about and I suppose it's particularly highlighted for you because of your stance, because your commitment to singleness at this time of your life. The issue that can arise from people of different genders, different marital states, different circumstances, and friendships between them. That makes a lot of people very nervous, doesn't it?
Yes. I think from my experience of singleness and from my writing and speaking about it, I think this can often be an issue more so for people who find themselves single again. So people who've been in a relationship and are divorced or widowed or single again. And interestingly, they have told me, it's not my life experience, but they have told me that friendship often becomes very difficult for them at that point. Say two couples have been friends and one couple suddenly splits. That's really awkward because obviously who stays friends with who, but also people can sometimes be more suspicious now of the single person as if they're trying to have a different agenda. I find that's been less of an issue for me as an always single person. But nonetheless, exactly as you say, I think you do have to be really aware of that. So I've got really good friends who are men and who are married. Some of my very close friends. It mostly where I'm really good friends with a married man, I'm also really good friends with his wife, and I think that's healthy and good. But it's often I know the man better. And again, I think there has to be some honesty, either spoken aloud or at least honesty in oneself about that. That wouldn't work if there was any kind of attraction between you. That just shouldn't work at all. It wouldn't work if you were spending time solely together in a way that the other person's spouse didn't know about. It wouldn't. There's some sort of things that obviously aren't helpful or safe or appropriate. But I really think that those kind of friendships can be beneficial and positive for everybody. So I think there has to be some kind of maturity and honesty and an openness about it. But I think it can be really positive if you're willing to put that time in.
And why do you think it's important? Because I think many of us would assume that best friendships are built on shared understanding, shared experience, shared perspectives and interests, and that it's our peers that are most likely to be our friends. But you seem to imply you think actually you should look for friendships with people who are outside your echo chamber.
Yeah, I think it's both and. So I think for me, my very closest friends, my very best friends, are the people who I do share quite a lot with. But it's what we think we need to share. So I might share my faith or even a particular expression of what that looks like for me, but we might not be the same gender. Or we might have shared a lot of history and experience, but not our faith. So I think you do have to share some things. But I also think, so, and possibly in that wider spectrum of friends, I also think it's really helpful for us to have friends that are really quite different from us, in all kinds of ways, in age terms, and in background, in belief, because I think we are challenged by that, but we are also grown and encouraged by that because people bring different perspectives. And I think in the church, we have a very particular opportunity for this, because for a lot of people, they're there, who are they friends with? They may be friends with the people they went to school with or grew up with or go to a sports club with. Church automatically places us within this quite unusual community of people where we know people who are 20 years younger and 20 years older than us and come from a totally different background, but we're all put together in this community. And I think that's a hugely positive thing, but it is perhaps to people who don't attend a place of worship, perhaps that's quite unusual.
Just on the diversity of friendship, because I'm profoundly passionate about this as well. I just think there's something amazing about the church being a prophetic example of what it is to have diversity in friendship. Because I think we have never been more fractured as a world in terms of us kind of only having people around us who think like us, vote like us, laugh like us, look like us. And yet Kate's absolutely right that the church is this beautiful tapestry of diversity. And I love those verses in Revelation where the church is compared to a bride. But I think the beauty of the bride is intertwined and linked with the fact that she is made up of people from every tribe, language and tongue. There's something so beautiful about that. And I think it's not an overstatement to say that the church is giving healing to the nations by being made up of people from such diverse backgrounds.
So if we need different types of friends as well as different types or circles or levels of friendship, how do we handle that safely and wisely in what is, let's be honest, an often suspicious culture? I mean, Kate referred to the suspicion that sometimes flows towards a single person as, what is their agenda? But as well, the church can be a very suspicious place. People make assumptions, people gossip. The world around us can be sometimes the world around us can be less gossipy about friendships than the church can be. How do we create a space where true friendship can be nurtured, protected, that honesty that Kate refers to, valued, so that community can be stronger and whole. Because that's the bottom line, isn't it? That if friendship is strong within a group of people, community is strong within a group of people.
I think that gets to the heart of it, actually, because I think one of the things I talk about a lot in my singleness talks and writing is about community, which is kind of corporate friendship, isn't it? That's what kind of community is that bigger scale thing. And one thing as from a single point of view that I challenge the church at is doing community better. Thinking about what's happening when people leave church on a Sunday. How many people are going home on their own for the afternoon? How many people who are going home to be with other people could invite someone into that space? What about Christmas and Easter? What about someone's birthday? What about those big things of life? How do we do life together better? And that's all tied in with this question of friendship. And I think if we as church understand that more, I have this sort of longing that for single people in society, so we talked about loneliness before, huge numbers of people are lonely. What I want church to be the answer to that loneliness.
Yeah.
I want it to be like a recruitment strategy for church, that we can say to people we know who are lonely, come to church, because there you'll find people who genuinely care about you, who'll be your friends, who'll be your community. I fear that we can't always say that because the church isn't yet good enough at doing it. But I want it to be true. I want church to figure out how to be such a good community of friends that the lonely people come in and aren't lonely anymore. And if we do that, then I think it kind of works out all of this stuff. I think what you're saying is totally right, Paul. I think there can be some of these issues around it. We have to have some honest, mature conversations. But I think if we get the community thing, then we work out what this looks like.
And I think there's some practical things we can do to help that. So at the end of church, at my worst, I kind of stay in my seat and allow the people to kind of gravitate around me who are like me. At my best, I walk across the room to talk to people who are really different from me, those older, those younger, those who look different to me. And I found that takes more energy and effort than just talking to my mates about the football that happened yesterday. But I think it's sometimes what we're all called to do. If we all did that, I think that's one practical thing. The second practical thing I think we can do is, again, whether it's in a church setting or wherever, we can kind of make sure that in our circles of friendships, we never close the circle. So it's a really practical thing. Even when you're at a kind of party, turn your circles into kind of horseshoe shapes and allow people to kind of tag on the end so that they can join in. But and the final thing, Kate alluded to, is be strategic and proactive about inviting people around for food. I think especially in the season, hospitality is such a key word. And so over the last few years, we as a family have tried to kind of invite people from church around our house, often on a Sunday afternoon, who are really different from each other. And what's so beautifully rewarding is the next Sunday when you go to church, you see these people who've been around your table, who've never previously spoken to each other. They've had a conversation. And then you kind of, I think there's something even Christ-like about that, because I think God is the great connector. And it's just one of the beautiful things that I think God does. He connects us. There's some people in all of our lives that we go, how did I meet that person? It can only be God. I think when we do a bit of that and do a bit of that kind of like introducing people for the sake of community and for the kingdom, it's really beautiful and really reflects Jesus.
And do you think and I ask you this as, both of you in different ways, perhaps leaders within the Christian community, do you think we respect, value, and proclaim that respect and value of friendship between people enough within the church? Do we talk about it? Do we preach about it enough?
I would say we're trying. Kate and I are trying to raise the volume of this conversation. Interestingly, Paul, last summer went around most of the kind of UK Christian festivals. And one of the things that we asked at each of the kind of seminars on friendship was, have you heard a talk about the agape self-giving love of God? And almost every hand goes up. Then we asked, have you heard a talk on the filio friendship love that we see in the Bible? Hardly any hands go up. Most of us would know when Valentine's Day is. Not many of us know when the International Day of Friendship is, 30th of July. Get it in your diaries. Let's celebrate some friends. Most people have playlists on their Spotify or whatever with lots of songs about romantic love. Very few of us could even put an album together, despite your references at the beginning of the show about songs around friendship. I think we could do a lot better. But I'd also add, I think sometimes we can be a little harsh on ourselves as the church. I think we're ahead of the world in lots of this conversation, but we need to continue to be ahead and continue talking about it. And one of the things that's been so exciting for me over the last few years is the churches that have run sermon series on friendship, have run some small group stuff around it. They talk about the benefits of that in terms of discipleship, in terms of leadership, in terms of unity, in terms of intercultural church, intergenerational church, even in terms of evangelism. We're all better off if we're better friends within the church and better and stronger relational muscles outside as well.
And if you want some guidance on that, then you can check out Phil's book. It's his Gold, The Best of Friends, and it's published by IVP. But it's true. I mean, this is the reality of it, Kay. I mean, Phil's written this book, and, bless him, he's too shy to actually promote it himself or something. But here's the thing, Kay. It's not something we often hear talked about in church. So, Vicar, what can church leaders do?
It is really good though, right? No, I think Phil is totally right. It's really interesting to hear you say you ask people to put their hands up, because I do a thing where I ask people to say how many people have heard a sermon on marriage, all the hands, how many have heard a sermon on singleness, hardly any hands, same thing. No, I think you're really right. And I think that was a good challenge, Phil, that we're kind of, maybe we're better, but we need to own it and continue to get better, because I think that also comes back to the different gender friendship that we were talking about before. Because I quite often say, often in the world, the secular world, there's this question of, can men and women be friends? Because does it all end up just being about sex? And I think in the church we get to say, let's model how this can be different and better.
Yes.
I think that's really important. Yeah, no, I don't. And it's a challenge to me. I'm now thinking, when have I spoken about this? Actually, even as someone who really believes in this, I'm now challenging myself to say, gosh, maybe there's a sermon series overdue. I think it is something we need to encourage and promote and talk about. I'm very intentional about introducing people to each other. Partly in terms of welcome. I read some statistic, and I can't remember where or whatever, but about someone coming to church for the first time and they need to meet 6 different people before they feel, I know what I'm doing here. And I'm forever introducing people to each other so that when they come back the next week, they think, I actually know someone here. Or just saying, you and you are both work in a similar field. You and you both like the same football team. Like, I think we need to own that a bit more. And also even just to kind of match make friends a bit, to say, well, I know you and I know you, and it is my belief that the two of you would work well together as friends. I think perhaps we need to own that a little bit more as well.
Timothy Keller said, spiritual friendship is eagerly helping one another know, serve, love, and resemble God in deeper and deeper ways. We all need people who will do that for us, and we need to do that for them. You've been listening to UCB Life Issues, all about friendship. So a big thank you to my guests, the Reverend Kate Wharton, and to Phil Knox, and indeed to Rachel, my producer this week, all of whom have proved that it's true. I'll get by with a little help from my friends. Ta-da!